I'm Sue Babin, and today's guest host and moderator of this segment of Nothing Without Us. This program has been developed to help us all understand and improve the workplace as it relates to people with disabilities, both businesses and consumers. And today we have Annette Boubanire, who is going to be our guest speaker on the show, and I'd like to welcome Annette to today's first show.
Well, thanks for having me and giving me this opportunity. I really look forward to doing this.
So Annette, let's start by telling our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I am a woman with short gray hair, in case there are any blind listeners, and glasses. And yes, I am on the older side, and I'm sitting in a black wheelchair. And I have a friend in front of me, my helper, Kirby, my service dog. I was injured many years ago, and I do a number of different things. I teach sometimes at URI. I do economic research in the area of disability employment policy, and I also run a nonprofit regarding accessibility of healthcare for people with disabilities. And of course, now I'm starting this show, Nothing Without Us.
And let's start right there. Why do you pick that title, and what's the meaning behind it?
Since the beginning of the disability rights movement, the rallying cry has been nothing about us without us. And that's because people tend to think of themselves as helpful and knowing what they need to do about disability, and they're messing it up. They mean well, but often when somebody said they're going to do something for us, I'm always like, oh my God, that means they're going to do something to us, aren't they? And this is policymakers, legislators, educational institutions, human service organizations. They're all very good at that because they're looking at disability from the outside of the window. When, there's smears on the window, raindrops, et cetera. And so they're only seeing a piece of what's going on. And when you have the lived experience, it's very different from what they're seeing. And so that's why that particular rallying cry. And then it has been shortened lately, like just nothing without us, period. We should be included in everything. And this is what we're going to be talking about is real inclusion in all areas of life. People with disabilities are real people. We have real wants, needs. We are siblings and children and parents and grandparents. We're business owners. We're employees. We're students. I mean, we're everywhere, and we're real live human beings. We go to church, we go shopping, we take vacations.
Just like anyone else.
Just like everyone else.
Which is why all people need to be involved in decision-making that specifically affects them.
Exactly.
Let's start by talking about accessibility. What does that mean, and what are some examples of accessibility? Okay,
accessibility means being able to participate at the same level as anyone else.
And what's the first step to be able to do that?
Get rid of steps.
There you go.
That is number one all the time. Let us get in the door. Get rid of steps. Make sure the door can be opened by us, or that that there is some arrangement there. That's one of those things. You want to make sure the doors are wide enough that we can get in and move around and take part in the same way as anyone else. So when we're talking in the workplace, it means that, of course, we need to have accessible bathrooms too, which is often overlooked, but that we can get around the workplace, that we can go into, the coffee corner or where the water cooler is, we can get between the desks, that we're able to do our jobs freely without encumbrances. In the area of sports, it means we should be able to take part. And by the way, there's equipment and employment and everything. Technology allows us to do almost everything you could possibly imagine. We don't have to say, I can't do it anymore. what we can and do say is, okay, let's figure out how we do it. And that's a real answer. So, in hotels, accessibility means having an actual roll-in shower where the faucet for the shower is not 6 feet away from the shower bench, because even able-bodied people can't do that. But it's all of that. In healthcare, it means having an exam table that's not up here, but that's down here, having a scale that weighs people in wheelchairs, having lifts that help people transfer. It means being able to take part at the same level as everyone else.
Those are really great examples to let people know what you're talking about. How common is it for places to not be accessible?
Extremely. Extremely. Yeah, it's an ongoing problem for us, and we always have to check ahead. Can we do this? Can we get in? Can we, and we have learned to ask specific questions about whether we can get in. I remember maybe a little more than 20 years ago, I was chairing the Accessibility Advisory Committee for the City of Newport. And somebody said, well, let's go through the chamber. Let's have a survey of businesses to find out what is accessible and what's not. And there were a lot of answers. Most were not accessible. But there was one answer that really cracked me up. It says, yeah, we're accessible. We're on a first floor, and there's only one step to get in. And there you go. And they believed they were accessible. And that, okay, come on, down. Good boy, good boy.
So it's really important for businesses to have accessible environments, both for purposes of potentially hiring individuals with disabilities or individuals with mobility problems, but also for customers that may come in who have mobility issues.
Absolutely. They lose a lot of business because they're not accessible. And it's not just those of us with disabilities that they lose. They also lose our friends, our family, our guests. I often told the story of I have a dear friend that lives on the West Coast, and she was visiting, and she was going to a wedding shortly after visiting, and so she wanted to do some shopping. I live in Newport. There's a lot of good places to shop for nice gifts, for wedding gifts. And when I couldn't get in the store, she said, I'm not going to buy anything there. And that was it. And those stores lost a lot of money because she was quite generous with her gifts. But so it's not just the person with the disability
That's a really
lose.
good point. There used to be, I don't know if it still exists, an accessibility guide that was available to people. So if people were looking for places to go to eat, or for, like you were mentioning, social activities, you could find out whether or not that place was accessible.
Yeah, I don't know if they're still doing that anymore. They were initially focused on restaurants.
Yep.
And one of the challenges of that kind of guide, even though, they put lots of work into it. In fact, I helped organize the ones in Newport County. But, it's a very fluid industry. And so restaurants come and go, and there's, different owners do different things. So it's hard to keep up with. It really is.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they're, I think it was just Accessible Rhode Island.
Yes.
I think that's, I can picture
Perna's. Perna.
Marie Perna.
Yes.
Right, exactly. She put a ton of work into that.
Yeah.
She really did. So
how do we help businesses that once they understand, this may not be an accessible environment, what can I do?
Okay.
What are the steps that the business, where can they go to get some information? How do they get resources available to them? What do they do?
Well, the first thing they have to do is understand that they are required. What
does that mean, required? What do you mean by that?
Federal law says you got to do this.
Okay.
And that's one of the biggest barriers we have. We hear, it's cost too much money, or we're historical and all of that. And we need to break down those barriers first. is I usually tell people, as far as the cost goes, there's two things. One is you're paying money to comply with fire codes. You're paying money for zoning and all of these other different laws that you need to comply with. You need to do it for the ADA as well. This is a law that has as much obligation. The difference, and they should really think about this, is that there is a 50% tax credit for businesses to become accessible, to remove barriers to accessibility, and that can be for employees or customers. And that 50% tax credit is up to $10,000 a year.
To make accommodations.
To make accommodations and to remove barriers.
What are some examples? So the obvious ones are the doorway.
Yeah,
But what are some
right.
other things?
Like I mentioned, the hotel with the shower too far away,
yep.
moving the shower bench or the faucet, whichever works better. Doing that, making sure that the doors open wide enough. And there are some very low-cost ways of making that happen if you're close. So, you want your entrance, you want your customers to be able to take part in what you have.
What about things like, I know McDonald's or one of the fast food restaurants used to have something that they could give you the menu in a larger print. Would that be an example of something?
That is. You can
Okay.
have menus in a larger print or in an audible format. For
And
people,
that can't be that costly.
gosh, no, not at all.
So the biggest expense is really the door widening.
The door widening and the decision to make it. The other one may be whether or not there's a need for a ramp, because there may
Okay.
be a step. And that's where the other argument comes in. Well, we're historical, we can't do that. I have two answers for that. One is one of the most historical buildings in the country, and certainly in the Northeast, is the Redwood Library.
And where is that?
That's in Newport.
Okay.
It's the oldest library. It is fully accessible. And you would not know that that accessibility was added later. So I think historical means I don't want to deal with it. The other thing I always say about historic is, okay, how historical are we deciding to be? Do you have running water? Flush toilets? Electricity? None of that was accessible, historical, right? So where is the line where you're willing to not be historical because it's convenient for whom? And that line, you have to define it, and you have to define what you want your customers to think and where you want your customers to be. And I think it's important to start doing that.
Businesses can get that tax credit.
Absolutely.
Do you know the tax number that goes along with that tax credit?
I actually have it on my
Okay.
website, and I
Okay.
distribute it all the time.
Okay.
The form is, it is an IRS form.
Okay.
The tax credit is in the ADA, not in the tax code, but it is available, definitely.
Okay.
I think they've protected it by putting it in the ADA so that when they revise the tax code all the time, they don't accidentally wipe it out, or intentionally, either way.
Is there some sort of a document, or does the IRS have a listing of the items that would be allowable for under that accessibility tax credit?
No, they do not. However, if you're widening a doorway for accessibility, that's going to count. If you're getting a lower exam table in your medical office, that's going to count. If you're going to get a scale that is wheelchair accessible, that's going to count. If you're, having a ramp to your entrance, All of these things will definitely count.
But it would be good for employers to see the listing because they may not even, you talked before about lived experience. So,
Right.
so they may not understand exactly what it is that somebody needs, but
Right.
someone like yourself or someone else that has, explain what that means, a lived experience.
Well, the lived experience means live on with disability. We know what we need. We know what works in our lives, and we know what we experience in different situations. And this is becoming better recognized now. Even legislation. There is legislation right now in the U.S. Senate called the READY Act, and it is that people with lived experience, in people with disabilities or in seniors, have to be included in the planning for climate disasters. Because we're the ones that know if we have to go to a shelter, what we're going to need. We don't want to go and find out we can't plug in our wheelchairs or get clean catheters or even get on the beds. We know what we're going to need to see in a shelter. And so we're supposed to now be, according to this legislation, they have to include people with lived experience in the planning for disaster. This was specific to climate disasters, but it would apply to any others, I would think. So.
Well, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think about some of the movie theaters have made some accessibility modifications, but they're not that great. For example, clearing away the front 2 rows so that people are looking up, right? Exactly,
Yep, exactly.
is not really the whole purpose. So some thoughtful planning needs to happen
Right.
with respect to thinking things out before any changes get made in a workplace or social recreational environment.
Well, exactly. I think sometimes when we talk about that, that there are lots of music festivals in Newport. And some person planned that, we've got to make sure people with disabilities can be there. By the way, these festivals, there's a lot of moving around. That's what you do. And so they set up a little corral, and I used that word kind of intentionally. It's kind of a roped-off area for people in wheelchairs. And you can only have one person not in a wheelchair in there with you. So if you're going with a group of friends or family or stuff, you're kind of stuck. That's where somebody with lived experience, I'm telling you, never planned it that way. I guarantee it. Because when we go out, we don't necessarily go just with one person. We may go with 12 people. One place that has, I think, addressed that problem pretty well is the Tennis Hall of Fame. I actually like their attitude about accessibility there.
And that's also in Newport?
Also in Newport. Yep. But what they did when they did their renovations, they had the bleachers, the real high, tall bleachers. And when they did the renovations, they put them a little bit shorter and wider. And under the new bleachers, there is a perfect pitch ramp. Perfect angle ramp that goes up. And that whole front row is mixed. Anybody with a wheelchair can be there. But because the chairs are all movable, you can have half a dozen people with you. You can have 3 wheelchairs and 2. I mean, it's whatever your combination is.
So that's well thought out.
It's well thought out. It's well planned.
Not just let's check the box that we did the accessibility.
Exactly. And that's a difference. That is one of the differences between having the lived experience and just saying, okay, well, we need to comply with the law. We need to have some accessible seating. So we're going to put 2 seats here, and then we'll leave enough room. They'll have somebody sitting on them either side, and boom, you're done. And it doesn't work that way.
Right.
Life doesn't work that way. Because normal life, you don't count all the time. Am I only going out with one person?
Right. No.
No, I think in your life you might have half a dozen with you.
Right.
you
People
know,
don't realize, they don't kind of
No.
think that, I went to a funeral a couple of weeks ago, and someone came in that was in a wheelchair, and two of the staff from the funeral home literally had to pick up the chair because they had 6 steps going
Right.
up into the funeral home. There was no way for this guy to be able to get in there to pay his respects, and it was his own family member.
Right.
So there's a lot that has to be done
Yeah.
out there with respect to
Yeah.
all aspects of our
Right.
society.
Yeah, and some buildings, I mean, I understand if it's an old building and they can't use that front entrance because there's not enough room to ramp it, so they put a side entrance that's accessible. That's not so bad, but if they build a new building with an entrance around the back that a person has to ring the bell to get it, I'm there like, I'm not begging to go into any restaurant. I'm just not going there.
Have you yourself talked to some of the businesses about changes that they need to make, and what are their responses when you kind of point out to them that they need to make some renovations or to make some adjustments within the workplace environment?
Right. They usually have one of several responses. One is, if I do that, people are going to think I'm accessible and something else won't be, and then I'm going to get sued.
Oh.
Which is kind of, they're like, if people think you're really trying, they're not going to sue you. But there are people that say, well, nobody else has complained about it, so we're not going to do anything. Or there are others that will say, we will do the bare minimum of what we have to do, and please don't bug us about it. Mm-hmm. And then you get that rare business, and the Tennis Hall of Fame is one of them, that says, we want people to be here. Mm. We want everybody to be able to come here. So we want to be accessible to everyone. And they are not perfect yet. They're still making changes, but every time they make a change, it does make it more accessible. And there is that's one case where we have an historical building too. They have this, I think it's called the Horseshoe Piazza, mm-hmm. And there is a ramp now that goes up behind it so that you can get up and take part in everything there. And it blends in perfectly with the architecture. It was not there until, I think it's about 15 years ago when Brad Parks was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he was the founder of wheelchair tennis. And they wanted to make sure he could be there. And so, that was kind of a beginning of a lot of their accessibility efforts. Yeah.
What are some basic costs? Like what approximately what would it cost to put in a door that was accessible, for example?
The issue is more often the doorway than the door itself.
So the doorway needs to be widened?
Yeah. And very often it can be accomplished by changing the hinges.
Okay.
Which is very low cost. I'd say under $50.
Okay.
Because you measure the accessibility of a doorway with the door open at a 90-degree angle. So there is usually then the width of the door and there's an opening where the hinge takes place.
Okay.
So that space is probably what's preventing them from being totally accessible. So if you get a hinge that then opens the door up flat against the wall, now you've gotten rid of that barrier for the cost of...
And what if it's an electronic door? What are
Okay, those doors, it depends. Again, there's a lot of variation. There are some you can do like under $1,000 for the most of them.
Okay.
Okay, so there are some that are pneumatic and some that are electric. And which one you choose is going to depend on what kind of traffic you have.
Okay. And an accessible bathroom stall, that would be approximately?
Well, it depends on how much room you have to work in.
Yep. Okay.
You may have to then make some other accommodation to widen the room. One thing you can do is combine two bathrooms and have a unisex bathroom that has enough room. No,
we're not talking thousands and thousands of dollars.
We're not talking what it would cost to if you were, sued. Yeah. And that's the other thing. If you sue, then it gets into all the newspapers and you're on the DOJ website, the ADA website. You don't want all of that.
Right.
You shouldn't have to have all of that.
So the bottom line is that accessibility is really important.
It is.
Not only to, increase opportunities for people with disabilities to be hired, but also for customers coming in the door.
Right.
And what would you like to say, Annette, as some closing comments for our viewers about this show, Nothing Without Us?
Okay, so future shows, we're going to be doing these kinds of discussions on a long-term basis about really including people with disabilities in business and in life. And we'll be doing we'll be doing one on service dogs. We'll be doing some on participation in sports, people in business, people in academia, and we're going to be looking at all of these, including healthcare as well. What policies, accessibility, stories about people that have found a new way of life because of accessibility.
And what does real inclusion mean? Just so people
It
can
means
understand
that nobody is saying you can't do this. There's no barrier to being able to do it. It means that, okay, all right, we have to think about this one. How do we make it happen? Then you've got it. Then that's the really and truly important part, that we are part of it. Nothing without us. Right.
Well, thank you so much for coming today and talking about accessibility, a very, very important issue.